Saab. These days, it's more of a if you know, you know kind of thing. But back in the day, they were known for their revolutionary, high-tech, reliable cars with just that little bit of Swedish flair to make them unique.
However, you never see them anymore. The company is dead, and more people are forgetting about this once proud brand. But how can that be? How can a company that at one point had so much promise, so much drive, so much passion, completely fizzle out?
Well, that's what I aim to answer today. My name is Jack Beyer, and this is the story of Saab. To begin, we're gonna have to go back to before Saab even made cars.
Saab was established in 1947 as a merger between two other airplane companies. This was done so that Sweden could maintain military neutrality. However, Saab only had so much business selling fighter jets, so they started to expand into other fields.
Saab actually had some other ideas for other industries to go into, such as actually building boats. However, that idea never really panned out, so they ended up scrapping it. But they did have their big breakthrough idea, all thanks to that man right there.
Gunnar Ljungström was originally a designer of airplane wings for Saab. He had never had any actual experience designing cars. However, he was known as being a technical genius, and his family had a background in engineering. If there was any man to learn how to design a car, it was Gunnar.
Gunnar was a very interesting man. He wanted to prove the importance of safety. So what he did was he got into a then new Saab 93 and drove it straight into a wall to only prove the point that safety was important. This was the kind of thing that drove Saab. Saab, for lack of a better word, was run by weirdos, but this was the key to their success.
Ljungström, designer Sixten Sasson, and many others would toil away, learning how and then designing a new Saab car. What they came up with was the Saab, which was the prototype for the eventual Saab 92.
This is the Saab 92. This is a car that it looks, you can see it, it's definitely goofy looking. But for a car designed by a bunch of airplane engineers, it's pretty good. It had no trunk, but had a low drag coefficient of 0.3 and had front wheel drive, which, while standard today, was nowhere near standard in 1949.
Another weird part about the early Saab cars was the engine. The first Saabs used a two-cylinder, two-stroke engine, kind of like this lawnmower right here, although this lawnmower ended up being a four-stroke. In turn, they used the two-stroke because it was cheaper and reduced costs. But what is a two-stroke engine? We have technical expert Alexander to explain more.
Most modern vehicles use a four-stroke engine. These produce power once out of every 4 strokes of the engine. Some lawn equipment, dirt bikes, and older cars use two-stroke engines, which produces power once out of each 2 cycles of the engine. These could be good for higher horsepower and torque and simplicity. However, you have to mix oil with the fuel, which is inconvenient and also reduces the reliability of the engine.
The Saab 92 is actually pretty successful considering it was made by a bunch of airplane engineers, selling about 20,000 units throughout its lifetime. Something else it was pretty good at was motorsport.
Saab used motorsports not only as a way to garner sales, but actually as a testing ground for its cars, with them especially using rally. But they turned out to be really good, with them winning the 1950 Rikspokallen Rally and them winning it 6 more times throughout the decade.
Saab had 5 basic requirements when designing the original 92. It had to be light, aerodynamic, front-wheel drive, safe, and timeless. Timeless meaning that over time the car could be constantly improved so that by the end of production it could be the best form of itself. As an example, something like Porsche did with the 924, 944, and 968. They were all essentially the same car underneath, but by the end of production, they were so drastically different because of the changes they made. This would be a common theme through all Saabs before General Motors.
Saab released new versions of the 92, improving on the car throughout the decade, with cars such as the 95, 96, and even a sports car called the Sonnet 1. These cars included things like a new 3-cylinder 2-stroke engine, new window designs, a trunk, all sorts of things. The 96 was especially important as that was the first Saab to be widely exported outside of Sweden.
A big part of this decade for Saab was a new engine. By this point, the 2-stroke engine had largely been phased out because it wasn't successful in the American market and was generally less powerful than its competition. So what Saab did was they took many different engines from many different manufacturers and tested them rigorously, which involved even getting a dude to go to Italy for months to test it, and what eventually came out was the Ford Taunus V4 that they used in several of their models for years to come. Americans during this time did not really buy Saabs. One, they were used to bigger vehicles like this Ford you see behind me, but also they wanted turnkey reliability, which is something that Saabs during this time did not fully offer because of the 2-stroke engine. Because of all this, Saabs were only really a niche product, only seen in the Northeast where it snowed a lot. However, Saab was looking to expand that. They merged with Scania in 1969 to increase overall production. However, with all that being said, the best was yet to come.
Saab up to this point, as I stated before, was a small company. Successful, but small. This changed with the release of the 1969 Saab 99.
The Saab 99 was the most important car for Saab since the original 92. It was the first new car Saab had designed since that aforementioned Saab 92, and introduced a lot of important features that would come to define Saabs for years to come. The Saab 99 included a lot of firsts for Saab and the car industry in general,
such as seat heaters, the cabin air filter, which allowed the outside air coming in to be filtered and in turn be safer to breathe. It was also the first Saab to have the famous key in the middle, so in the event of a crash, your knee would not interfere with the key. They even had a test where they dropped a 99 on its roof, and it survived just fine.
Now, even with all those innovations, Saab still had one more they wanted to do. See, as most car companies do, they wanted their cars to go faster, to be better. However, what other companies did was just make their engines bigger. I mean, just shove a V8 in it and then you'll make more power. But that was too easy. So what the engineers decided to settle on was turbocharging. Now, at the time, turbocharging wasn't really all that popular. It was very experimental. It was only really done in diesel trucks. However, that made it all the more appealing to Saab because here's a technology that kind of already exists, but then they can implement and engineer to make better. But what is turbocharging? Luckily, we have an expert to explain how turbocharging works.
This is a turbocharger. The exhaust gases from your engine pass through this half, spin a shaft that has a compressor wheel on this side of the turbo that connects to the intake side of your engine. What this does is it forces more air in and allows smaller engines to produce more power and be better on gas.
Essentially what a turbocharger does is it turns a relatively pedestrian car like a Subaru Impreza into a Subaru WRX, a car that is much faster. And that would be the light of Saab for a long time. The Saab 99 and 99 Turbo turned Saab from a somewhat niche company into being more known. Before, Saabs were just bought by people in cold climates, but now they are being bought by people not just across the country, but across the world. And then came the Saab 900.
The Saab 900 was another continuation of the 99, like how the 93, 95, and 96 were continuations of the 92. However, the 900 turned out to be another step in the turning point of the company.
The Saab 900 turned to be a turning point for the company. It introduced better crash safety and, of course, a new turbo engine. Another thing that helped increase the popularity of Saabs during this time, during the 900 Turbo, was Saab's APC system, which allowed the car to control the amount of boost the turbo was putting out, and in turn to reduce knock. What does this mean? Well, it allowed the engine to, first of all, create more power, more torque, while also meaning that fuel octane didn't matter as much, because the engine could control how much the turbo was doing, and in turn, you didn't need premium fuel all the time, meaning that now the turbocharger was a lot more accessible to more people. Another thing we have to mention is that Saab actually released a new car during this time that was also still very impactful.
The Saab 9000 was Saab's first car since the original 99. Saab, because of the success of the 99, then 900, wanted to move a bit more upmarket with an executive car to compete with the likes of the BMW 5 Series and the Mercedes-Benz W124. However, due to money concerns, which we will talk about later, the car was actually more like 4 different cars.
The Saab 9000 was actually done in partnership with Fiat, who also owned Alfa Romeo and Lancia. This platform would become known as the Type 4 platform, which was the basis of the Alfa Romeo 164, the Lancia Thema, and also the Fiat Croma, and finally the Saab 9000, which was reviewed very well from the press and got even better as it was refined over time, like this Motor Week review from 1991.
The Saab engineers eventually came out with the Saab 9000 Aero, and like the 900 that preceded it, it came with styling cues, a stiffer suspension, and a sweet B234 engine making 222 horsepower. That made the Aero the fastest front-wheel drive car at the time, which was quite a feat for a company that had only been making cars for 30-some-odd years.
This success was then carried into the infamous Long Run, a 20-day and 20-night endurance challenge which took place at the Talladega Raceway in Talladega, Alabama. The goal? Cover 100,000 kilometers while averaging 212 kilometers an hour, translated into 62,000 miles and around 132 miles per hour. In the words of legendary Saab engineer Ollie Granlund,
"The main purpose of the Long Run project is to test the endurance of our cars as part of our ongoing testing program."
they took 3 Saab 9000 turbos at random off the production lot and basically sent them right off to Alabama and raced them. The cars had little to no issues outside of one car having a burn exhaust valve after 16 days of being starved from fuel occasionally, which is just insane. And outside of that, the cars were driven hard, fast, and non-stop outside of just needing fuel and tires. And the Saabs just did that. In the process, they broke 21 international and 2 world speed records, just trying to test how good their cars were. This is just another example of Saabs just being Saabs.
Even though the Saab 9000 just did, well, that, and the Saab 999 were still successful, not everything was sunshine and rainbows in Trollhättan.
The stock market crash in 1987 and just general economic downturn, combined with Saab's high R&D costs, led the Saab consistently losing money throughout the 1980s, with the Wall Street Journal reporting that Saab had been losing 2 billion Swedish kronor. This led to another big turning point in 1989. Some in the community would say that this was the beginning of the end.
Now, what does a massive American conglomerate like General Motors have to do with a little Swedish company like Saab? Well, surprisingly, quite a bit.
For those who don't know, General Motors is the long-running brand that owns Chevrolet, GMC, Cadillac, Buick, and many other companies. They were successful in many areas already, but they wanted to expand into the European car market, as at the time, car brands like BMW and Mercedes were flying off the lots.
So, General Motors originally wanted to buy Jaguar, but so did Ford. So what ended up happening was a long-standing battle between General Motors and Ford. Ford ended up winning the battle, but General Motors still wanted a European company. So luckily, Saab needed money desperately at the time, and GM wanted a European company. What that ended up doing was the merger made in hell. So in 1989, Scania sold its 50% stake in Saab, and General Motors then bought up that 50%.
Initially, it was supposed to be a match made in heaven. GM had the dealer network and the money to supply Saab, and Saab could now have the financial backing to innovate and engineer whatever they wanted.
But as I said before, this turned out to be a match made in hell. So why was that? Well, it turned out the two companies were very philosophically different.
Long story short, GM only really cared for production volume, sales, and profit, and not really innovation. One big example of this was the J-body, one platform that was then turned into 5 different cars. That's relatively normal, but those 5 cars were then sold, 1, alongside each other, and 2, were barely changed from one another, with only slight variation. GM did this for the sake of cost cutting, and they did this practice all of the time with many other cars, but they plan to do that with Saab.
However, the first order of business was to redo the aging Saab 900.
The Saab 900 New Generation, or NG as it was called, was actually a relatively good car for its time. For being a General Motors based car, it still had a good amount of Saab flair, like the key in the middle, tons of safety features, and a bunch of other little things we will get into later. And like all modern Saabs at this point, there was a turbo engine offered that made more power, about 185 horsepower. They also tuned the suspension a bit more for handling purposes.
The only issue is that the Saab 900 didn't really sell. It stopped turning a profit by 1995 and discontinued in 1998. When the 900 was discontinued, there were 2 more what would be considered actual Saabs to be made after that. There was the Saab 95, which was a replacement for the ever-aging 9000. And then, as a replacement for the 900, there was the Saab 93.
The Saab 93 was one of the last Saabs ever made, its production ranging from 1998 to 2011. It was a compact executive car, competing with the likes of the BMW 3 Series, Mercedes-Benz C-Class, and Audi A4.
In general, throughout the 2000s, Saab was not very innovative. The 9.3 was the only car really given a redo, as the 9.5 wasn't going to be redone until 2010. And the rest of the portfolio included the Saab 9.7X, which was just a rebadged Chevy Trailblazer, and the Saab 9.2X, which was just a rebadged Subaru Impreza. So because of that, nobody really ended up buying the cars. There were many other reasons, in fact, too. The aforementioned stagnant, surprising lack of innovation, the economic downturn overall in 2008, and GM meddling throughout that period of time is what led to the eventual demise of Saab.
The thing was Saab throughout its history is the cars were expensive for what they were. So if someone saw a Saab and a BMW on the lot at the same time and didn't really know of the cool goofy features that the Saab offered, most people just went with the BMW or whatever else was there, even though they were both similar. BMW and other manufacturers like Audi and Mercedes had the name recognition that Saab really never had.
Saab had many talks to find a buyer for the company, one of which included talking to Koenigsegg, the hypercar manufacturer of all things. However, that deal fell through. Eventually, Saab settled on getting bought out by another weird car company, Spyker. Saab's ownership by Spyker isn't really anything to write home about. It was mainly just filled with a lot of scandals of people not getting paid, no one knowing where the finance is coming from, all sorts of stuff, which eventually led to the demise of the company. However, during Spyker's ownership, there was a new model. There was a brand new 9.5, which was reviewed quite favorably by the press, saying that it was more of a return to the original Saab. Unfortunately though, that car was only made for a couple of years and no further cars were ever developed, so for all intents and purposes, the end of Saab had come. Now, the thing is, when you're a company that is as influential on the car industry and as different as Saab was in its time, you tend to not go forgotten. And that's true with Saab. There are plenty of people who are in today that still own, drive, and cherish a Saab and carry the legacy of what Saab truly meant as a car company. Now, I could sit here and try to explain all that stuff as well, but I might as well just go to someone who has owned multiple Saabs, has been active in the community, has been in the community longer. So I emailed Auto Autopsy, the YouTuber, to explain to me what Saab meant, what happened, and he actually got back to me and this is what he said.
The sad truth, unfortunately, is that Saab AB was never profitable and lost money just about every year. They also were notorious about not following GM's directions because they believed GM's platforms weren't good enough. Saab provided a lot of amazing tech, ideas, etc. to the car community as a whole. They were the first brand to mainstream turbocharging with the 99 Turbo. They were the first brand to have cooled seats in a car, among countless safety-related innovations as well. I think that, on top of their innate uniqueness, is why people love them. They're cheap, relatively fast, powerful, luxurious, practical, reliable. They aren't the best at any of those items, but they check all of the boxes you'd want when looking for a car. Their quirkiness and relative rareness is a big draw for me and many others too. As we have so many new startup car brands, one thing we can learn is that daring to be different and unique, while appealing to some, is not appealing to the masses. Saab is a great example of that. They were incredibly different, but comparatively, on paper, many preferred the more established German alternatives.
Truthfully, I don't think I could have summed it up any better than that, but long story short, it sucks that we have to lose a company as cool and as innovative as Saab was, but unfortunately that's just the reality of how a company that doesn't conform goes. Most of the time they don't really survive because they don't cater to the needs of the average person, but when they survive for as long and they fight for as long as a company like Saab does, you really have to give the people credit that they tried. Even though the ride for Saab is over, at least there was a ride. At least there are multiple rides. And I'm happy that there were people that are able to experience that.